What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with got you?
Having people challenge you and having failures in life are actually the best thing that can happen to you because they're going to toughen you up. They're going to make you learn from your mistakes. You're going to bounce back, and bouncing back from adversity is what will tend to make you more fearless than ever.
Sean DeLaney.
Robert Greene is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, The Laws of Human Nature, The 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction, The 33 Strategies of War, The 50th Law, and Mastery. Robert was originally a guest on episode number 123, so if you want more content, go ahead over there and check that out. This episode dives deep on many of the key lessons Robert learned throughout all of his writings and what he's focusing on now.
Robert, welcome back to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Sean. Thank you very much. Just celebrating the great win of the Dodgers last night.
Yeah, a native to Los Angeles, so I know this has been a huge past couple months for you. It's funny, I was thinking about this conversation with you, and one of the words that always comes up for me with regards to you is just determination, both because the monstrosities of the books you write, the amount of detail and information, but then what you dealt with. Last time we talked, overcoming the stroke, how's it been? I just feel like determination for you is just at the root of you.
Well, it is true. It's been, I don't remember exactly when we spoke. Was it shortly after my stroke?
Actually, you had a couple of months to recover. So I want to say it was just over a year and a half ago.
Oh, really? So we talked not that long ago. Well, it's been really kind of a struggle. I had to deal with some of my own personal limitations, which is, along with determination, is sometimes you can get impatient. So I've been doing like several hours of therapy every day, physical therapy. I see a physical therapist every week because I'm so wanting to get back my old life of swimming and hiking. And it's just going so slowly. And I just get very frustrated. And I just have to tell myself, the little things, you're still alive. You still have your brain. You're still able to, write another book. And my wife tells me, you are recovering, you are getting better. It's just in my own body, it feels like, damn, I thought at this point, 2 years after, I'd be at least 50, 60% back to what I used to do, like at least to take some hikes, but I'm not. So it's life.
Yeah, it's life, difficult times. Fortunate enough, though, we're getting to have this conversation again, and I know you're even incredibly fortunate for that. I am wondering, though, and being able to assess so much throughout your life, how vital and important have challenges been to your personal growth?
Well, I should also preface this by saying I understand that a lot of people right now are going through things a lot worse. So I'm very aware of that, and so I try to hold down as much as I complain or reduce it a bit. My whole life has been a challenge. I mean, it is for everybody really to get ahead in this world, unless you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth and on third base, as they call it. Your life to be successful is full of all sorts of challenges. And the challenge for me initially was, I had to kind of make my own way in the world. I had to figure out what I wanted to do, and I traveled around the world trying different jobs and struggling and working, not very well-paid positions and never quite figuring out what I wanted to do. And then getting criticized and being told, Robert, you're never going to be a writer. You don't have what it takes to be a writer. Dealing with a lot of doubt. And then my own kind of, my own issues where I maybe sometimes wouldn't work as hard as I should have on something. I would give up. And finally, when presented with the opportunity to write my first book, The 48 Laws of Power, I was already about 37 years old, somewhere around that range. And I was so hungry and so ready for that moment that, it was an incredible challenge to write a book. I've never written a book. And to be as ambitious as I am, to write something that I felt would be a classic that could stand up with Machiavelli and Sun Tzu and something like that. But then you have to prove it. You can't just have these dreams and these illusions. You have to actually do the work. And so, those challenges definitely made me who I am today. And I tell people in life, you never want to be at kind of an even level where things are kind of at where you can, at where your goals and skills are, you can match it. You want it to be kind of like right up here. If the challenge is too high, you're going to fail. So if I tried to write, something that was outside of the realm of possibility, I would have probably failed, and it would have been a kind of a bad emotional experience. But when it's it's a step, half step or step above you, all of your energy, your determination, your resolve, your creativity will come into play, and you will rise to the occasion, and you'll learn from it. You'll get tougher. So it's a good question. Challenges have always been sort of the source of what fuels me.
Robert, I absolutely love this. I mean, you're the master in terms of decoding human nature and understanding mastery. So I'm wondering, how do you go about calibrating that level that's just above your comfort zone? Is that something that you're kind of drifting back and forth on? And as long as you're doing it over the long term, you're on the right path?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, you don't consciously think about that exactly, like, oh, I have to find exactly that kind of challenge, but it is sort of my process. So the 48 Laws of Power, I could have made it an easy book. I pitched it to the man who was the packager, the producer, as a book on kind of the Machiavellian version of power in the world today. I could have made it a lot easier for myself. I could have just done what a lot of self-help writers do, just kind of write a quick book in a year, filled with some advice and some ideas. And it would have been a lot easier. But I gave myself this challenge of, I want to do incredible research. I wanted to read hundreds of books. I wanted to make this a universal book. So my ambition was, this isn't just a book for Americans. I want Chinese people to read it. I want Russians to read it. I want people in Europe to read it, Africa, all over the world. So I had to get stories from all over the world so I can make it. This isn't just a book about white men in power. It's about everybody. It's about African Americans. It's about women, etc. So I gave myself a goal that was, above what I could have easily would have just been that book I first mentioned to you. This was like right there. It was a challenge, but it wasn't impossible because prior to the 48 Laws of Power, I had something like 50, 60 different jobs. So I had seen so many different kinds of power games and manipulation. I had a lot of experience to draw upon, particularly in Hollywood. And then I read so many books on history, and I'm always thinking about strategy. So it wasn't a stretch for me to try and reach to what my goal was. But it was certainly a challenge because the second thing was I chose a form of the book, which you now know probably, which you've never seen a book that looks like that, right? Mm-hmm. With these stories, the interpretation, the things on the margin, the little images. It was a risk, because that could have failed. But that was a challenge to make the book unusual and different. I tell people in this world that, it's kind of like in ecology, in an ecosystem. An animal that finds the right niche where there's no other animals that are there living in a certain area and having certain food that it can get to is going to survive and evolve faster than one that's crowded in an area where there are all sorts of other animals. And the same thing is for entrepreneurs, which, a writer is essentially an entrepreneur. If you follow what everybody else is doing, which in my case would have been the usual kind of sappy self-help book about you're wonderful, people are great, you just need to get along, blah, blah, blah. It was a crowded field. Nobody would have ever taken notice of me. I found my niche. I created a book that's kind of dark. It's kind of full of history, but that kind of has a certain tone to it. So, and I do that for each of my books. I don't want the book. That's another problem a lot of writers have is they kind of keep redoing the same book over and over again because it's easier. I always try and make my next book a challenge so that when I start the book, I go, damn, this is going to be a little bit hard. I have to rise to the occasion. I have to really nail the research. This book could easily fail. It might embarrass me. So I'm constantly creating those kind of challenges for myself. That's my process.
Yeah, it's almost that creative destruction approach. It's funny. I think you just put the puzzle piece together for me, why your work resonates so much with me. And all those typical self-help books, it looks like someone came up with an idea in a weekend and decided to slap together a book. it's so apparent that you've done years and years of work and research. And so it's almost that appreciation for you in terms of doing that. But then also they read like an amazing biography, and then they have the self-help component as well. So it's the total package there. I am really intrigued, though. You mentioned finding that niche and just such an entrepreneurial twist and mindset there. How did you go about that, both in terms of willing to take on the risk, but then also carving out that own path?
Well, you have to have some experience in life, first of all, to understand that is the game. And I talk about it in my book, Mastery, that the game is really to realize what makes you different, not what makes you similar to other people, because there's no power in that. Well, your power lies in your uniqueness, in your individuality, and what separates you, because you have your unique DNA that I talk about nobody else has ever had before, your own experiences in life. You have a unique energy, a spirit, and that's your purpose in life, is to use that to its utmost, right? So you reach a point in life where you know that you're different from others. How can I use that? How can I exploit that? So, that in of itself shows you've tried to create your own niche. So my little niche, if you want to go there, is I wrote in journalism and I didn't like it, but it taught me how to write under a deadline and how to write coherently and clearly. I tried to write novels, which I didn't do very well at, but it taught me how to create something in a format that's entertaining and interesting. Then I worked in Hollywood, which taught me all about entertainment. And also it taught me a lot about power, because I saw a lot of power games. And so by combining all of that, I could make this book. Now, most people in my position would have said, well, I don't really have the experience. I don't have a degree in history. I don't have a degree in psychology. Who am I to write a book on power, right? So the second thing you need, besides having the cojones, pardon the expression,
I love it,
to kind of create your own niche, is to be fearless, to not be fucking afraid. So many people are so afraid in this world. They're so timid that they only want to do what other people have done. They only want to follow the path that other people have followed, right? So I knew that I was not going to follow that path. I was not going to write a book that was just like all the other books about power. I was going to make it different. And then what happened was I made the book as you now see it in the form that I made it. I turned it into the editor at Penguin. They had already bought the book. And they said, Robert, we like it, but there's some changes we would like to make. The structure is a little bit too unusual for us. Why don't you make things kind of more like a seamless narrative, instead of having all those bits that you created with the interpretation, the keys. And I talked with my partner, who was the packager of the book, Joost Elfers. And I said, look, Joost, and he agreed with me. If they're going to demand that, we're going to walk away. We're going to give back the large advance that we got, because that's not what we want to do. We have faith in this, in what we've created. So you're going to be criticized for following your own path. People are going to tell you, oh, that's too risky. Oh, no one's ever done that before. Nah. You have to say, just get out of my face. I'm doing what I want to do, and I'm going to prove it to you. And having doubters is a very good motivating factor. Now, of course, my first book could have failed, which was a definite risk, and you're putting yourself out on the line, and I wouldn't be here talking to you if it did. But at a certain point, if you're going to create something unique, you have to be kind of fearless and kind of own it, like I did it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, so be it. But, that's where I think power in this world lies. And that was the path that I followed.
Yeah, you're hitting on some big topics here. I absolutely love this. I'm thinking about that unique energy and that purpose. And once you have that, do you think that fearlessness comes?
Well, it's a good question about where fearlessness comes. I mean, to some extent, there's possibly a genetic component where some people are kind of born that way. But it's also something you can develop. You can develop any kind of muscle or any kind of emotional strength within you. And I don't really know where mine comes from. I think the genetic component for me is I have a mother who is extreme. She's like 93 years old. She is the most determined person you'll ever meet. She just won't accept no for any kind of answer. So there's a kind of element where you believe in yourself. You have a self-confidence and you feel like you were born to create something. And I always had that kind of belief. So some people don't. Some people, and not to say that I didn't have moments of doubt. I had tremendous moments of doubt, particularly before I wrote the book. But in the long scheme, I kind of really did believe in myself to an extent that some people could have thought was grandiose. I thought I could have been a really, really good writer. And so when people start doubting you, as that man did when I was 25 years old, who said, Robert, you're never going to be a writer. Just go to law school, go to business school, give it up. It hurt. But then 3 months later, I said, I gave him the finger in my own head. And I said, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to keep at it. So it's whether you believe in yourself. But the other thing is, it's easy to believe in yourself when you've developed real skills, So if you're like somebody who's just kind of floated through life and you've never really worked hard at anything, and then an opportunity comes your way, secretly you're going to doubt yourself because you haven't put in the work. You don't really have the skill set to pull it off. And so those doubts are going to infect you. You're going to take little half steps. And I always tell people, if you're prepared, if you have like something that you're nervous about, but you're prepared, you'll be a lot less afraid. You'll be a lot more fearless if you've done your homework. You have a big, important job interview and you're very nervous, do your goddamn homework. Yeah. Research the person you're interviewing with, research the company, research who was there before you and why they failed. And then you'll feel a lot better when you go in there. So I had reached a point where I had developed so many skills and that I could believe in myself, that I had something to say and that I would stand by it. So those are kind of the combinations that will make you fearless. And, having people challenge you and having failures in life are actually the best thing that can happen to you, because they're going to toughen you up. They're going to make you learn from your mistakes. You're going to bounce back, and bouncing back from adversity is what will tend to make you more fearless than ever.
Yeah, it's so funny when that opportunity meets that preparation, and it aligns with who you are, that unique power of yours. What people are capable of, it's pretty remarkable, but that work needs to go in there. I'd be really intrigued to know, what's the narrative like in your head when you're taking on one of these challenges, you're experiencing a little bit of that self-doubt. Is there anything that's been consistent throughout your career?
Well, what goes on in my head is a series of, am I actually going to pull this off? I give myself a challenge. I make it ambitious. And is this going to fail? Because I'm a very competitive person. People who played card games with me or backgammon or chess or even sports, they know I don't like to lose. I hate losing, right? So putting myself in a position where I've almost bitten off more than I can chew, in the book that I'm trying to write, makes it so that I have to really up my game, and so I'm constantly questioning myself. So I'm on my 7th book, and I've had 6, and I'm not trying to brag, but I've had 6 bestsellers. They've done very, very well. And here I am now on my 7th book, and I'm still going, damn, this book isn't going to work out. You don't have the energy for it. You're getting older. You're losing your game. There's too much here. Maybe you didn't think through the concept enough. And so it's not a negative thing. It makes me work harder, So if I write a chapter, if you're a writer, this problem. You write something, and in the first flush, you think, man, that's great. It was really good. I nailed it. And then you reread it a few days later and you go, wow, that really sucked. It's really not nearly as good as I thought it was. You have to be willing to go through that process. Some people don't do that. They think everything they write is wonderful. So I'm always doubting what I write. I go back and go a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh draft till I feel like I've really, really nailed it. So the voice in my head is often like an internalized voice, maybe from my parents, that you're not up to it this time. You're gonna fall flat on your face. This book isn't gonna work. You're gonna have to go back to working at Walmart or something like that. So these are kind of motivating factors. That's what I'm hearing in my head.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm always intrigued too about how that during that process. So for you writing those book, how it changes you. And I'm wondering if there's one of your books do you think has changed you the most?
Well, the laws of human nature led to my stroke. So that was the biggest change, because that book just literally killed me. You know, I don't know. I mean, in a very banal way, the 48 Laws of Power was a huge change, because I went from being someone who was an obscure nobody, kind of a loser, to somebody who's now, meeting 50 Cent and rappers and political people, etc. So that was a huge change, just from the success of it and from my own self-esteem. The war book was a very difficult book to write, almost like Human Nature. It took a lot of thinking, more thinking than in almost any of my other books, because it was a very difficult subject. I wanted to make warfare relevant to everyday life, which a lot of books attempt but never really quite go far enough. And it just was a very difficult book. And it taught me a lot. The 50th Law, that book I did with 50 Cent, was another real lesson for me, because I've told the story before, but when I first turned in the book with the publisher at the time, they were basically going to cancel the project, because they thought I was taking too long. But more than anything, it really wasn't a stellar piece of work. I had tried to create something that was so much about 50 that I hadn't put much of myself in it. And so we had to find a new publisher, which was a very critical moment. My reputation was on the line. I'm working with 50 on this book. We found another publisher and basically told me, you need to make it more Robert Greene, put more of yourself in it. And okay, all right, you're right. All right. And they said, and you have 8 months to get the book in. What the hell? I've got to write the whole book from scratch again in 8 months? No way. And then it's like get rich or die trying. I better do it or I'm going to fail. And I did it, So that really changed me. That showed me that I can do, was a great boost to my confidence. I can do whatever I put my mind to, even under the worst time frame. So those are kind of the things, how some of the books have changed me.
Yeah, I can imagine that amount of confidence in being able to do that in 8 months would be tremendous value for you going forward. I am wondering about that self-discovery process. And I mean, you bring so many hard truths to light in your books. So I'm wondering, when you're doing all this research and you come across something that's completely negative, it seems like, and you're like, oh, wait a second, that sounds exactly like me. How do you step back to really analyze yourself there and maybe see if you need some change there?
I'm not quite sure what you mean. Like if I see something negative about, and it's a quality that I have.
Yeah.
What you mean? Well, that was sort of the process in the Laws of Human Nature, where I'm kind of writing about these different facets of human behavior going back thousands of years. And they're sort of negative, really. But they have the potential for being positive if you're aware and you can turn it around. Things like narcissism, irrationality, short-sightedness, aggression, a dark side to your personality, grandiosity. And in writing the book, I had to come to terms with the fact that, yes, Robert, you have these qualities. Like I remember doing the narcissism chapter, and I never think of myself really as a narcissist, but I had to come to terms with the fact that really actually you are. You do have a lot of these traits. And particularly in the chapter on aggression, I had to recognize that I'm actually can be quite an aggressive person. Not unpleasant, but the overall arc of my character is to be rather aggressive. And so, it taught me some things. It taught me, first of all, I try and say it in the Human Nature book, is that we try to elevate ourselves. We always think that we're better than other people unconsciously. We always think that we're smarter than the next person, that, we're more noble and generous, etc. That we have these superior qualities. And I have that as well, obviously. And it had to knock me down a peg, which is sort of the point of the laws of human nature. You're not as great as you think you are, which is not the best tagline for trying to sell a book. Because most people want to hear, you're better than you think you are. And I'm telling you, no, you're not. You're actually worse than you are. You need to do some work. But it made me realize that I'm in the same boat, which was very good because it made me think, well, if I have to improve myself, how do I do it? So how can it made me relate better to my reader, to see the own weaknesses and foibles in myself. So, that's sort of what I went through.
What about when you actually come across one of those things and you said where we all think we're better than we actually are? What about when you actually are better, right? Like, Robert, you're a terrific writer. So I have to imagine you should almost tap into that more.
Well, that's dangerous when you start getting like that. That's where I talk about the chapter on grandiosity. I have in the 48 Laws of Power a Japanese saying, which was, I can't quote it right now very well, but it was basically, when you win a battle, that's exactly when you need to tighten the strap of your helmet, which basically means when you win, that's when you really need to think about yourself and think about your own limitations and go back to square one. So the moment you start saying to yourself, Robert, I'm a great writer, is the moment that that inner tension starts lessening, and it shows up in the work. You start acting like you think you're great, and unconsciously you put less work, less effort into the project. You kind of glide by with what you wrote before, and that's not good. It's better to think that, you're not really as good as you think you are, and you need to up your game. Because, you live in a world where most of us we may have a boss, but we're kind of on our own. We have to motivate ourselves. We have to get up in the morning and figure out what drives us, because it's not coming from the outside. People aren't telling us, get up and write that book, get up and do this or that. You have to have it from within, right? And so having a little bit of doubt about yourself, or I need to get better at this, will motivate you. Now, if it's another thing, if it's too high, if you really doubt yourself, if you really think you're crap and you can't meet it, then you're just crushed. But it's better to have that little bit of doubt, that little voice in you saying, you're not as good as you think, Robert, than to have that voice, wow, I'm just the best, I've got the Midas touch. Everything I do is wonderful. So, and that's very dangerous, because by our nature, we always overestimate ourselves. And psychologists have proven this, that we always think that we're smarter than the actual reality, that we have a higher IQ than we actually have, that we're more clever than we actually are, on and on and on. And so to feed that, and success will do that, is very dangerous. You need to have your feet on the ground, and you need to find these little motivating factors like I mentioned here.
Yeah, you shine such tremendous light on these complicated topics. It kind of reminds me of the story I read about Ray Allen when he was down in Miami and they won the championship. And it was the next morning. He was just back in the gym. He's like, this is all I know how to do. He was like, right. I've got to keep getting better. There's nothing else here. It's funny, though.
Maybe you could take one day off and celebrate, but I understand that very much.
Yeah, I always love hearing about your depth of thought around these things. So I'm wondering, for you, is there a particular skill or mindset you have that you think is just hardest to pass on to others?
Well, it's that I want to make something that I'm very proud of. I want to have something that there's a legacy. I don't want to do shoddy work out there. I don't want to be someone who kind of does 3/4 of what they could have done. I want to go all the way, because I hate the word, because it's like I'm bragging, but it's like an integrity thing. Do you feel like you need to are you actually thinking about the readers and your audience or your customers or whomever you're trying to appeal to? And you're thinking about them, and you want to please them, and you want to create something that will really have an effect upon them. So that kind of conscientiousness is a very important quality to have, because it means no matter where you go, You're going to be conscientious and diligent. You're going to work hard. So I tell people, even if you're in a crap job and you know that you're worth better than that, you know that, you're better than flipping burgers at McDonald's. You have some artistic talent or some entrepreneurial skill. When you're at that job, just do the best you can and try and use it as a learning experience, because that's a skill, always trying to do the best job that you can and rise up to the occasion and learn from each experience, and don't just use it as dead time. I have this thing that I talk about with Ryan Holiday about alive time versus dead time. If you're just at a job and just kind of going through the motions, it's like you're dead. You're not learning anything. You're not productive. But if you're there, always like observing people and trying to understand human nature better, if you're trying to figure out how, what makes someone successful, etc., you're always going to learn. So the attitude that I'm always going to do the best that I can, I'm always going to learn from situations, everything is an education for me, is the most important skill that you can have in life, because it means you're constantly improving, And so even when I had jobs, and I've had some terrible jobs, believe me.
What was
and
the
I
worst
probably,
one? What was the worst one?
Well, some of the most soul crushing ones were jobs in Hollywood, where I really hated what we were making, but I had some responsibility in that job. So I worked as a temp in Los Angeles, a temporary worker, and they would send you out to all these different jobs where you're just doing office work, like like the television show The Office, kind of really demeaning jobs like that. And I remember in LA, when I was back in the early 90s or so, I was sent as a temp to this like aerospace company in Los Angeles. Man, it was the most depressing place I'd ever seen in my life. Nobody wanted to work. They were making missiles, so everybody kind of hated what they were making. And it was like something out of the 1950s. There were like yellowed pictures of Dwight Eisenhower on the wall, things like that. I mean, it was great because it gave me a lot of material for a screenplay, but it was a very depressing place to be in. I mean, I've had other probably even worse jobs than that.
Can a place like that, say there's 1,000 employees there, can that place change? Can someone come in and a group change the zeitgeist there?
I write about that in The Laws of Human Nature. I have a chapter on cultures, so whenever you put together more than two people, you create a culture, because humans interact in a particular way and they kind of create a group mentality. So if you have 10 people, that'll happen. If you have 100 people, yeah. If you have 20,000 like Microsoft, whoa, it's very strong. You can feel it the moment you walk into their offices. And if you have like a stagnant culture where people aren't really trying hard and it's kind of like the ghosts of the past are there, and you come in as a new leader, a new CEO, it's extremely difficult to create a new culture. It's extremely difficult. There are ways you can do it, but and I outline some of my ideas in The Laws of Human Nature. But it's much better, if you're going to do it, it's much better to come into a situation where it's new and you're able to create your own culture. So the lesson for entrepreneurs, the most important lesson is, if you're starting a business, keep in mind that you are the one creating that culture. It all starts from you. Your spirit, your mentality, your attitude will filter down all the way through the hundreds of people in your office. So it's up to you from day one to create the right kind of culture. And if you do it the right way and you make some mistakes, which inevitably will happen, you can correct them. But to come into a place which has a static, conservative, rigid-like culture, and we see it all the time, like Microsoft is a company where I've actually given talks and I know the culture there. Bill Gates steps down, Ballmer is gone, new CEO comes in. And, he's got a lot of energy and everything, but it's such a hard thing to change, such an entrenched culture. And there's some positive things about the culture at Microsoft, undoubtedly. But to come in and try and change something like that is very difficult. And you see that I mean, I give examples in the laws of human nature. So, people will come into politics. You enter the Pentagon, the Defense Department, and the heads of the Defense Department. You're the new head of the Defense Department. You're going to reform it. You're going to change that culture. You find it's impossible. It's going to change you. And that's what happened in the Vietnam War. All these generals came in who thought, I'm going to put the brakes on this war because it's not working out. They ended up going the opposite direction because that was the culture. And in Hollywood, directors and people think they're going to come in, they're going to change that culture. The moment you enter Hollywood, it changes you. You become part of it. And you're not even aware of that. So it's almost impossible. I would say, don't take a job like that if you can.
No, sound advice.
Or do what I say in the 48 Laws. Always preach the need for change or for reform, but do very little.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know you're such a fan of history, much like myself, and you've studied so much throughout history. Who have you been most impressed by in terms of the culture they created? This could be within a business, a company, it doesn't matter.
Well, the paradigm I have in my books and that I always think about is George Marshall, who took over the Defense Department in the 1930s. Essentially, FDR told Marshall, he's the person who created the Marshall Plan. He said, look, I think we might be heading towards a war with Germany, something like that. He's talking to him like in 1936, 37. And we are woefully underprepared for this. And I've inherited a Defense Department that is so sclerotic, that is so filled with old men who have like these sinecures. They have these positions where they don't do anything, but it's just like a paid salary for them. And they're holding on to these little domains. It's all these little political little tribes within the Pentagon. I can't fix it. I can't do anything. And I need someone to come in and reform the hell out of this thing from the bottom up. And Marshall, within a course of 3 years, this complete magic, he's really the one, besides FDR, if you want to give credit, who is responsible for how well we did in that war and saved our lives, in essence. He basically realized, first he got rid of all the old men who were just collecting a paycheck. He was kind of brutal, which is something you need to be sometimes in life. You need to be, I've told my wife, happiness is firing people. Sometimes firing people is a joyful thing because they don't do the job and they're nasty and they're manipulative. Get them out of there. He fired dozens of people who were holding things up. And then he decided, I need to fill this place up with lieutenants, disciples, people who have my spirit. I give them a mission statement, which is a military term, comes from the German philosophy of warfare, the mission statement, and they're going to fulfill it. So I don't have to be micromanaging this 30,000 employees in the Defense Department. It's too much. And so he chose all of these brilliant people, including Eisenhower, including Bradley, all of the ones who became great generals in World War II, to be his man there to do the kind of reform jobs that he needed to do. He was thinking, he had the spirit and the new ideas. They were the ones that executed it. He created a brilliant paradigm. And I tell people, if you want to learn more, go to my book, The 33 Strategies of War. I believe it's chapter 5 in there. I talk about Marshall and I describe in detail how he did it. But that is the model for how you reform a culture. And he created people like Eisenhower. Eisenhower would not have been, we would not know about him if it wasn't for what Marshall did. And he was like a brilliant, brilliant lieutenant who could execute his ideas and then went on. He learned so much under Marshall and went on to be a great general. So I think he's, to me, the most brilliant person who's ever done it. But it was hard work. It was very difficult. And he put a lot of mental and creative energy into thinking how to do it best.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that mental and creative energy and a lot around hierarchy and rank. And I was just reading a Wall Street Journal article about Jack Dorsey and about how hands off he is with his approach to leadership. And do you think that decentralized approach is something that we're going to see more of moving forward?
It depends on the culture. It depends on where you are. Some places you need a more centralized hand on there. I don't have a particular example that comes to mind, but I've been around different cultures where, kind of having it decentralized is a recipe for disaster. It depends on who you are and what the kind of company or business that you're creating. So hands off can be also a recipe for disaster. I would, if it were up to me, I would take kind of a middle road, which is sort of like what I'm saying Marshall created. And it is also sort of what Napoleon created back in the early 19th century with how he structured his army. So you're the person in charge. You're creating the spirit there. And I definitely don't like leaders and CEOs who just sort of let other people run the ship for them, because the spirit, the attitude that pervades a company comes from the person on top, whether it's man or woman or whomever, right? You better believe that, and you better create the right kind of attitude, right? So you can be hands off, and what's going to happen is it's going to be like a classroom of kindergarten children when the teacher leaves the room. It's going to be chaos, right? If that's your approach. I don't really know what's going on with Twitter. I don't know what the esprit de corps is like there. So I'm not criticizing Mr. Dorsey. He's probably not as totally hands off as we're saying here, but you're the one in charge. You're creating the top down spirit. And then, but you're not a micromanager. I've been around CEOs. I was on the board of directors of a company where the CEO was more the centralized person who was basically created the whole spirit of the company, but he was too much of a micromanager, and it drove him crazy. It exhausted him. And when you get exhausted, you make bad strategic decisions. So there you need to be centralized and then to decentralize a bit by finding the right people to have like a structure. The other thing I tell people is when I consult is the structure of your company is a very creative decision. It's as creative as Van Gogh painting a painting or whatever, because your structure is going to be how your company functions, right? You want a company where the flow of information from top to bottom, bottom to top goes very quickly and fluidly, where there are not all these stop gaps where people stop telling you what's going on down here. You want to have a full range of information. So you want to be on top, you want to be in control, you're the boss, you're taking responsibility, but then you have these layers of people below you who are doing a lot of the executing work for you. So it's a mix of the centralized and the decentralized. That to me is the ideal. But in some places, it depends on the people you're working for.
Yeah,
too many people are not observant and are not sensitive. Be sensitive to the people who work for you, to the kind of business that you're in. Some businesses need to be buttoned down and top down. Others need to be more fluid and open. So be sensitive to the people that are working for you and kind of reflect that in how you organize your company.
I'm wondering, is that empathy, being able to look through someone else's eyes and try to understand the circumstances they're in? Do you think that's been one of the biggest realizations for you, just with the amount of work you've done uncovering history?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard process. You'd think that as social animals, I talk a lot about this in my last two books, as social animals, you would think that we would naturally be gifted for this. And we do have an empathy muscle, the way our brains are designed, and as social animals. But we live in a culture where people are becoming more and more self-absorbed, right? They're in their smartphone or whatever. And it's reflected in psychological studies and how much more narcissism is a problem in our culture in general. And so I think it's harder and harder for people with the levels of self-absorption we have for you to actually get inside the spirit of other people. But think about it this way. You have, if I told you, Sean, I could give you a pill, a magical pill that would suddenly bring you all the power in the world, everything would open up for you. You go, yeah, man, I'd pay you $10 million for that. Okay, well, here, I'm going to give it to you right now. It's not a pill, it's just some advice. And that advice is the following. No matter what you do and your day-to-day level, if you transform yourself into someone who is able to get inside the minds of others and understand what they're going through, their emotions, their predicaments, their problems, the whole world will open up for you. Everything will happen because you'll be able to persuade them. You'll be able to have influence over them. It'll open up all these doors for them. So you'll be able to understand what they are like from the inside out. Now I can't read your mind. That's not possible. But I can read your moods, your emotions, your tone, and things like that. And I can get a sense of what's bothering you, what you like, what your values are. And from that position, I can go in and I can do something where I'm appealing to your self-interest, and then you're going to do something back for me. Okay, I'm a writer and I have to think about my readers. Getting inside how they're going to read this particular page means I'm now thinking deeply of you, and I'm going to write something that's going to connect to you. Thinking of your customers that you're trying to sell a product to, and not just in your head with your own brilliant ideas, but getting inside their world, their problems, their issues, what's bothering them. You're going to create a product that will connect with them 100 times better than if you just stuck in your own ideas. On and on and on. If you're a politician and you truly, truly are connected to the voters out there, to what their problems are, what their day-to-day life is, not in your little ivory tower, not in because you're a multimillionaire, you don't understand them, but you can understand them. You can take the effort, and that will lead to incredible powers of politics. It is the $10 million red pill that will change your life if you're able to develop that kind of empathy skill.
I'm thinking about that empathy with your customers and you, someone with millions of readers. Is there a particular avatar you're picturing when you're thinking that through?
Well, the thing for me is I'm writing books that I'm trying to, I'm trying to appeal to everybody. So, my books tend to skew a little bit towards younger men, in their 20s. But I'm not conscious. I'm trying to appeal to everyone. I want women to read my book. I want older people to read my books. I want as diverse an audience and global as possible. So it makes it a little bit harder because I'm trying to think of what connects everybody, what's relevant to everybody's experience. And so, it's more ambitious that way. But so I have to go through a process of what are these universal human concerns, So for instance, all of us are insecure. All of us have insecurities, right? And how we deal with our insecurities will be either we will succeed or we won't, right? All of us are afraid of dying and death. We have that elemental fear. And how we deal with that fear, believe it or not, will play a huge role in how successful we are in life. All of us feel envy. We constantly compare ourselves to other people. So I choose qualities and things that I understand everybody shares because they're part of just being a human being. And I think about those deeply as I'm writing what I'm writing.
During that research process where you're trying to uncover these universal laws and principles, I guess I'm wondering, how deeply have you thought those through prior to the research? And then during that research process, how do you know this is one that's going to make the book?
Well, you develop a kind of a muscle after you've done 6 books. So it's kind of gotten better and better and better. But from the very beginning, even the 48 Laws, I look for stories that have a kind of mythic quality to them. They kind of transcend time and place. They have some sort of elemental drama to them. The human being in a predicament where it's either life or death or failure or success or humiliation or whatever. And so things that are strongly emotional and powerful. And so, but they also have to be stories that I can narrate, that have a human dimension to them. So when I'm doing research, it doesn't happen often, maybe 1 out of 30 books. My eyes light up, wow, that's a great story. or that's a great little tidbit in there, because that's going to really resonate with people. You know, it's not the best example, but when I did the laws of human nature, because sometimes it's like a little paragraph in a book that nobody else would notice. I was reading in the ancient Roman writer Tacitus, who wrote these histories of ancient Rome. And he had this story of this man who was so irritating to everyone. He was like a demagogue politician, that they hated him and they banished him to this town in northern Italy. And then in that town, he so irritated people that they couldn't stand him. And finally, by the end, they had to banish him to this tiny little rock in the ocean where he'd be alone, because nobody could stand being around this person, right? And it was just in like a paragraph. Whoa, what a great story, you know? What a great thing, because certainly we all know that we have people who are so fucking irritating. They're just such troublemakers. They're always roiling the waters. They're such pests. That wouldn't it be wonderful to just put them on a rock somewhere where they could yell at the waves or the sky at the cloud and irritate the birds and leave us completely alone? A story like that has comedic value, has drama, and has a lesson to it, you know? So I'm looking for things like that. And over the years, I get better and better and better at identifying them, you know? But it's not easy, you know, because some, like the book that I'm researching now, it doesn't lend itself to the same kind of story. So I've had to change my game a little bit and find different ways of doing this. But I'm looking for things with dramatic value that are going to make you, entertain you, and enlighten you. And if you have those two things, then you've got it.
No, certainly. It kind of sounded like you might have someone in mind there as you were telling that story about putting someone out there on the rock.
Oh, we all do. We all do. But yeah.
No, I love hearing about you, even the 6 previous books, and then just continuing to evolve. And I know we kind of split ways here when we were talking about that lifelong learning and continuing to push yourself. So it's so interesting to hear that. Someone I think about a lot with regards to that, and I know this is someone that you had great admiration for, is Kobe Bryant. And I would love to hit on him for a minute, because being a former athlete, I resonate so much with having that dark side, that animal instinct. And I would love to just hear your riff on Kobe.
What sport did you play?
Well, I would not I played lacrosse, so.
Really? Oh,
yep.
That's a tough sport.
Yeah. So just
we have some injuries that just show some scars.
Yeah, certainly do.
But yeah, well, you know, I love Kobe. I'm a diehard Laker fan, and those years, late 90s and early 2000s with Shaq and Kobe, my God, it's like, you know, it's like the best time to be a basketball fan. Those were such golden years. And then the rebound with Pau Gasol and the 2 more championships. So I loved Kobe for several reasons. First of all, he was an amazing player to watch. He was so graceful. He could do things that nobody else could do. You know, you would always say, that is the most impossible shot I've ever seen. Nobody can do that. How did he do that? Again and again and again. But the other thing was, he worked so hard at it. He was like Ray Allen, you know. He was always in the gym. He was always trying to get better. He hated losing. Nothing, you know, he was more afraid of anything than losing. He never rested on his laurels. He never did what you told me to do, which is to say, I'm a great writer. He never said, I'm a great basketball player. He was always looking to improve himself. He had to develop new moves. He had to develop a mid-range jumper at some point. He had to develop a 3-point shot that he never was that good at originally. He had to learn to be a better team player, how to pass more, which he did, and how to just be a general leader as a role model for the team. All of these things he was constantly learning, constantly improving. He had weaknesses. He's a human being like all of us. He wasn't perfect, but he was also a very eloquent and graceful person. You know, he never embarrassed himself when he talked. I always thought, this is somebody who's very eloquent. He's had an incredible amount of experience. He's learned a lot. And then I've talked about it in my Human Nature book, where I talk about the dark side of our personalities. And I explain that all of us have what I call a shadow side to our personality. And I explained in that chapter where it comes from. Very briefly, we all have to be these socially perfect creatures that are always so pleasant to be around, always polite, and always telling people what they want to hear, that the dark side of us, which exists in all of us, which certainly exists in children, gets pushed down and down and down and down. And we repress it. And it's dangerous when we repress it, because then it comes out in moments that we can't control. But the best people in life are able to acknowledge this dark energy and to use it productively. And Kobe, his dark energy was, man, he hated to lose. He was going to crush you on the basketball court. Now, Michael Jordan was very similar in that way. But what a great thing to take that kind of aggressive, bitter, angry at energy that he had and channel it into winning a basketball game and being the best as a team player in that sport is a kind of a paradigm for all of us. Where if I tell people, if you're an artist, don't be afraid, or a writer, don't be afraid of your anger. Don't be afraid of your dark energy. Put it into your work in some way. If you're someone who cares about social issues, don't just like get angry at your cat, your dog, or your wife, or whatever. Channel it into a cause and build a great cause. Channel that dark energy into something productive, because it's very powerful energy. And Kobe kind of exemplifies that for me.
It almost seems like one of the reoccurring themes here comes down to awareness and awareness of yourself and your natural tendencies. Do you think that's one of the biggest themes throughout your work?
Yeah, and it's not easy because, who do I know better in life? What do I know most? Well, it's myself, obviously, because I live with myself every day. I hear my own thoughts, etc. But the truth is, you don't know who you are. You're a mystery to yourself. And that's sort of the point of the laws of human nature. You're walking around with these assumptions that, you're in control of your life. You make rational decisions, etc. You have no idea about how you're governed by unconscious impulses, how you're manipulated by things you see on television or on social media, how you conform to the people around you, how much you were determined by your early childhood experiences, things that were impressed upon you, perhaps traumas from your parents at an early age. You're carrying them around with you all your life, and they're determining your behavior, and you have no idea about this. So the first thing you need to do to be a better human being and to have more power and success in life is to get down on your hands and knees and say, yes, I, Sean, me, Robert, yes, I don't know who I am. I am a mystery to myself. There are things inside me that I have no control over. Let me see if I can begin to understand myself better. And that first step, that admission, is a very important critical moment, because being self-aware, you can now begin to correct those mistakes. You could read 2 million self-help books in your life, and I would never recommend doing that. And you'll never get better, ever. It won't matter one whit, because you don't know who you are. You think you're fine. You're not able to internalize any kind of criticism, etc. You need to know who you are before you can change who you are.
I absolutely love that. I think I already know what the intro to this episode is going to be. That minute-long riff there was absolutely amazing. So I just always learn so much every time we get to talk. So I always feel so fortunate for that. One thing I would love to know, though, so you did the book with 50 Cent. If you could do a book with anyone, and this could be anyone throughout history, who would you elect to write a book with?
Anyone throughout history? Well, that makes it so easy for me. Gosh, thank you. I would do a book maybe with Napoleon, because, what a great strategist he was.
Speaking of becoming too into his ego and thinking he's too great, he had a few good years there, and then he let the ego get to him a bit.
Yep. Yeah. But those first years are incomparable in the history of warfare and strategy.
Believe me, I'm obsessed with Napoleon. So
those years of 1798 to 1806, no military leader could ever come close to it. Then the last 8 years were pretty disastrous. Maybe 1808 would be the turning point with the invasion of Spain. So he had a good run for a while, but then, as you say, his ego got to him. I'd like to do a book with Leonardo da Vinci, as I did in Mastery. I found him, and then Machiavelli. I think he and I together would do a great book. I mean, I would be more of his disciple. I would, tell him what's happened in the last 500 years or so since he died. But I think we would do a really interesting book together.
Yeah, those would be fun reads.
I will suggest that to my editor, see what we can do.
No. I need to ask this. You mentioned Da Vinci. He was one of those visionaries, and he wasn't just seeing decades out. He saw so far into the future. How was he capable of doing that? What is it about those few people throughout history who've been able to see that far out?
Well, I don't know if there's a formula for it, but I talk in Mastery about him, and there was another German writer named Goethe who was like that. These are people that you would call a universal person. I mean, the word is universal man, but I don't say that anymore. A universal person, meaning your knowledge is wide-ranging. So you're aware of the science, what's going on in science. You're also aware of things happening in the culture. You're aware of the political situation. You have a deep understanding of history and how things work. And if you reach a point like the proverbial 10,000 hours, 20,000 hours of that kind of deep thinking, you're on a level where you have a kind of global perspective on things. The German word is Gestalt. You can see the entire shape of what is happening. And with that kind of awareness of the times that you live in, and other things, gives you a way to kind of understand what the future is going to be like. People who study something very deeply, and this is a little bit different from what I just said. So the classic example is what's going to happen to the Soviet Union in the 80s, because it's obviously on the decline. And there were people who had these wild speculations, but then there were these experts who had studied the Soviet Union their whole life and who knew exactly where it was going and what was happening. They were predicted to a T what the 90s were going to be like in that country once communism fell, the years with Boris Yeltsin, the anarchy that ensued, the rise of the oligarchs. They could predict it because they understood the Russian people so deeply, the Russian spirit and the situation. So when you have your hands on all the different aspects of something, you see the global picture, you're going to be able to have a much better sense of the future. Nobody's a Nostradamus. Nobody can predict what's going to happen. Da Vinci is a little different because he was on the level of technology. So his thing about the future was he was able to create drawings and even some instruments that were like hundreds of years in advance. There's a story that asked me about stories that interest me when I saw research. I can't remember exactly because I've done so many books, but he designed for a party for one of the kings in Italy or one of the dukes. He created this lion, this kind of lion sculpture that came to life and that breathed something, that fire, I don't know what, that came out. I mean, the description of it was so insane. I go, really? He built that? That sounds like something out of nobody in the 21st century could build. What is this thing? He had an uncanny sense of mechanics and technology because he'd spent his whole life dissecting and seeing how things move and seeing how things, what made them operate, etc. That he could build and create and imagine on a much higher level. So it's a universality of knowledge, either in a particular field or in everything, which is what made Goethe so brilliant, because he was a poet and a scientist and a man who read history. And he predicted that there would be airplanes in the future, that Europe would form a common market, there would be all these kind of interlocking technologies and also the dangers of it in the early 19th century. So there you go.
Robert, I could riff all day with you. So this is such an honor for me, such a pleasure. Always learn so much. We're of course going to have everything linked up. Is there anywhere in particular you'd like the listener staying connected with you or checking out your work?
Well, the best source for it is, is my original website, which still exists, which is Power, Seduction, and War.com. The "and" is spelled out, so Power, Seduction, and War.com. Those are my first three books, Power, Seduction, and War. And there you'll find links to my other three books, to my Instagram account, to Twitter, to Facebook, and to an email address where you can send me your ideas or whatever, or your criticisms or whatever. So that's, and on my interview, so that's sort of the best site that we collect everything in.
Awesome. Well, once again, this is always a
I
true
also have
pleasure.
a new YouTube channel.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
We'll get that linked up as well then.
yeah.
Fantastic.
I only have like 4 videos on it, but they're there.
4 well worth watching, I'm sure. Well, Robert Greene, you go enjoy the Dodgers win there. And
I'm going to go celebrate. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Robert. It was great talking with you.
Very great. Thanks a lot, Sean. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
What got you there with Sean DeLaney? 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 What got you there with Sean DeLaney?